There is a loaf of bread that a body can make with nothing more than flour, water, and salt. No packet bought from any store, no company standing between you and your supper table, only those three plain things and the wild goodness already living in the flour and the air around you. Folks were baking this way long before anyone ever thought to sell yeast in a little envelope, and it is still, to my mind, the finest bread there is. A loaf with a crust that crackles when it cools, and a crumb soft and open inside with a flavor that only time can give it. This is sourdough, made the old way. I think of my own mother's kitchen, and a wide-mouthed crock she kept covered with a cloth on the counter, never in a cupboard, for she said a starter wanted to be seen and remembered, not tucked away and forgotten. She fed it most mornings before anything else, before the stove was even lit. And she used to say a starter was the one thing in her kitchen that was never really finished, only ever waiting for its next feeding. I did not understand as a boy why she treated a jar of flour paste with such care. I understand it now. Now let's get to the bread itself. Everything begins with the starter, so let's talk plainly about what that is. It is only flour and water, stirred together and left to sit, and here is the wonder in it. The flour itself and the air of your own kitchen already carry tiny living things too small to see, the same kind that has raised bread for thousands of years. Mix flour and water and give them a warm spot to rest, and those living things wake up and begin feeding. And as they feed, they breathe out the very gas that makes a dough rise, and they lend it that gentle sour taste besides. You are not buying anything or adding anything from a packet. You are only giving a home to something that was already there for the taking. Building one from nothing takes about a week of patience, and no more than that. Stir equal parts flour and water into a jar, thick as a batter, and set it somewhere warm, loosely covered so it can breathe. Each day, pour off about half and stir in a fresh bit of flour and water. Little happens the first few days. Then it begins to bubble, and it takes on a pleasant sour smell, and by the end of a week, it is lively, rising and falling with each feeding, ready to raise a loaf of bread. Once it is going, keep it fed, and it will keep you in bread the rest of your days. Bake often, and you feed it daily on the counter. Bake seldom, and it can sleep in the cold box, needing only a weekly feeding to stay alive. And do not fret too much over it in those early days. A little gray liquid on top only means it is hungry, and you stir it in or pour it away and feed it, and it is fine. A sharp smell, even something like vinegar, is only hunger too. What you watch for, though it is rare, is any fuzzy growth or a streak of pink or orange, and that alone means starting over. Otherwise, a starter fed regular is a hearty thing, far more forgiving than most folks expect. When you mean to bake, you build what the old bakers call a levain, a fresh, larger batch of starter mixed the night before, left to sit until it is bubbly and doubled and full of life. That is your leavening, built fresh and strong for the loaf ahead. For the dough, you mix a good measure of flour, mostly white bread flour, with perhaps a portion of whole wheat worked in for depth, together with water. And here is a thing worth knowing about this bread. It wants a wet dough, wetter than you might expect, for that wetness is what gives the loaf its open, airy crumb once baked. It will be sticky and shaggy at first, and that is exactly as it should be. Resist working in more flour to tame it. Mix only until no dry flour remains, then cover the bowl and let it rest, undisturbed, for a half hour or better. That rest lets the flour finish drinking up the water on its own and begins building its own structure without any work from your hands at all. After that rest, work in your levain and your salt, folding them through the dough with your hand. Now here is where this bread parts ways from an ordinary loaf, for you do not knead it hard on a floured board. Instead, You fold it, gently, over time. Reach under one side of the dough in the bowl, stretch it up, and fold it over itself. Turn the bowl and do the same all the way around, a dozen folds or so, and that is the whole of it for one round. Cover it again and leave it be. Every half hour or so over the next few hours, come back and give it another round of folds. 4 rounds across an afternoon is plenty, and each time the dough grows smoother and stronger between your visits until a shaggy, sticky mess has turned, almost on its own, into a smooth and supple dough that stretches without tearing. Then comes the long rise, what bakers call the bulk ferment, and this is where the real work happens, though none of it is yours to do. Leave the dough covered in a warm spot for several hours and watch it slowly swell and fill with bubbles as the starter feeds all through it. This cannot be rushed, for it is this slow rise that builds both the lift in the loaf and that deep, tangy flavor no quick bread can match. Once it has grown puffy and light, turn it out, divide it if you're making 2 loaves, and shape it. Fold the edges gently toward the center, turning the dough as you go to build a smooth, tight surface. For that tension is what helps a loaf hold its shape rather than spread flat in the oven. Let it rest a few minutes, then shape it once more into a tight round and set its seam side up into a floured basket or a cloth-lined bowl. From there, into the cold box, it goes overnight for its final rise. This does 2 good things at once. It lets you bake fresh come morning, and that slow, cold rise deepens the flavor further still and makes the dough easier to handle and to score. The old way was always the slow way, and here the slowness pays you back twice over. Now to the baking, and the secret here is a humble one, a heavy cast iron pot with a lid, the kind most kitchens already have. A proper crackling crust wants steam in the early part of baking, the way a bakery oven gives it, and a covered pot traps the loaf's own steam right around it. Set the empty pot, lid and all, into the oven and heat it as hot as your oven will go. When it's ready, turn your cold loaf out onto a piece of parchment and score the top with one confident slash, cutting perhaps a 1/4 inch deep. That scoring gives the loaf a place to open as it springs up in the heat, rather than tearing wherever it pleases. Lower the loaf, parchment and all, into that fiercely hot pot, cover it, and bake it that way for about 20 minutes, letting the trapped steam do its work. Then remove the lid, lower the heat a touch, and let it finish uncovered until the crust turns a deep, rich brown, darker than you might think to stop at. A good sourdough wants real color near mahogany, for a great deal of its flavor lives right there in that dark crust. Bake it bold. And then comes the hardest part of the whole undertaking. You must let it cool completely before you cut it, as much as an hour, even with that smell filling the whole house and the warm loaf sitting right there waiting. A sourdough cut too soon is gummy inside, for it goes on finishing itself as it cools. Wait it out, and when you finally cut in, you'll find a crackling crust giving way to a tender, open crumb and a flavor with just enough tang to remind you why this bread has been made for thousands of years. I want to say something plain here. There's a whole industry resting on the idea that good bread has to come from a store, or that raising a loaf is too much trouble without a packet of yeast, bought new each time. And here is a bread that asks for none of that, made forever from flour, water, salt, and whatever wild goodness is already living in your own kitchen, free for the keeping. Nobody set out to make folks forget that bread could raise itself given the chance. It simply happened slow, the buying of bread and the buying of yeast taking the place of an older knowing, until a loaf came to seem like something only a company could give you. It never was. It only ever asked for patience. Tell me down in the comments, did your family ever keep a starter going, a jar or a crock fed for years on end? And if you start one from today's video, I would love to hear how it's coming along. Tomorrow, we're staying close to this same idea, homemade egg noodles, rolled by hand from just flour and eggs, nothing from a box at all. If you've got flour and eggs in the house, you're closer than you think to the best noodles you've ever had. Until then, take good care of the ones at your table, and remember that the oldest bread there is needs nothing from any store, only flour, water, salt, and a patient hand.